And to your point, who is near things and who's been allocated to be around them.
Maybe it's a good time to revisit some of these races that we're waiting on. Three major ones, obviously. CD2 race, if we can pull up those numbers from where we were on Tuesday,
sure.
With Joe Baldacci kind of leading the pack there. But
our last look of where people stood.
Right,
yeah.
right. Joe Baldacci had about 31.6%, and then Matt Dunlap behind him with 29%, and Jordan Wood 28.9%. So all kind of close in that CD2 race there.
No real
for
runaway
Democrats,
there.
Which they'll be facing Paul LePage because he was running unopposed.
Former Governor LePage, now 77 years old. It's the second time he's unretired from Florida to move back. People remember that in 2022 he came back to challenge Governor Mills and lost by 13%, though he carried this CD2, and that's one of the reasons why the Republican Party gravitated to him in this conservative-leaning district. They think he can pick up the Golden seat. He was in the race while Golden was still congressman before Golden said he wasn't going to run. So Joe Baldacci is 61. He's a senator from state senator from Bangor. That's his base. He carried Bangor on election night, as expected. And Matt Dunlap right behind him, about 1,800 votes behind him, the state auditor, former Secretary of State for a dozen years, and also a long time ago a state legislator. In fact, one of the issues between Baldacci and Dunlap in the primary was who was more pro-abortion rights, and Baldacci bringing up one vote from 2003 where Matt Dunlap had voted for a 24-hour waiting period for women who go to a clinic before they can have the procedure. That became a point of contention in their race. Jordan Wood's a first-time candidate. He's the youngest person of the three finalists. He's 36. He worked in Washington as a chief of staff for a California congresswoman, had some other jobs, and he has hope. He's only 293 votes behind Dunlap. And ideologically, probably the closest to Paige Lau, the 29-year-old social worker from Aroostook County, who just got that 10% of the vote. Her second choice votes will be the first ones allocated, and there could be some movement in this race, and that's what we'll be looking for. Does Wood leapfrog Dunlap, who's the finalist against presumably Baldacci if he's still in first place?
Okay, and then next for the governor race in the Democratic side of things, Nirav Shah was the one who was leading the pack there. He had 26.8% of the vote, followed by Hannah Pingree, who had about 23%. Troy Jackson, 21. Shanna Bellows, about 20. So the three of them all kind of close together there behind Nirav Shah.
Yeah, Nirav's kind of an interesting story. Everyone remembers him from the pandemic. He still has that name recognition. Also a first-time candidate. Has only lived in Maine just a bit more than 5 years, which is the minimum requirement to be governor. His residency wasn't challenged, though, when he submitted his petition. But, you know, legally it hasn't been an issue. Politically, though, it might be, especially if he's the nominee. You know, so he's up 7,733 votes over Hannah Pingree. The Pingree name, her mother's Congresswoman Shelley Pingree, but she's accomplished in her own right as a state house speaker. In fact, she had that job in her 20s, was the youngest woman ever in the United States to be a state house speaker. Also was a very close aide to Governor Janet Mills, 7 years leading what Mills called the Office of the Future, and had her hand on everything from housing to climate change. Troy Jackson, the former state Senate president, you know, he won Portland, he won Bangor. A lot of union support, probably the closest aligned to Graham Plattner, the Senate candidate, who probably brought out a lot of votes for himself and possibly for Troy. Troy was his number one choice. Shanna Bellows, the Secretary of State, very close behind Troy Jackson, and is hoping that she can pick up the 1,000 or so votes she would need to sort of leapfrog him and then perhaps you know, be in the next round against Hannah Pingree, and all four of them have hopes and see a path, starting with Angus King's second choice votes, to move up and hopefully get to the final round.
Okay, and then the Republican side of things, obviously Bobby Charles was leading that race with 37.9%. Followed up by Ben Midgley, about 20, Jonathan Bush, about 19, and then Garrett Mason had about 11%.
Yeah, so Charles is 22,463 votes ahead of Ben Midgley, who's only 386 votes ahead of Jonathan Bush for second place. And you can see the 8 candidates, Jim Libby on the bottom, the state senator from York County. He's actually the 8th name. We didn't talk about him very much because he actually suspended his campaign. Robert Wessels going from the bottom to the top. Really a career in retail. A guy from South Paris was on the Board of Selectmen there. His biggest executive job was running a Walmart with 400 employees. David Jones is a realtor. He lives in Falmouth. Had higher hopes than the 3% that he got. And then Owen McCarthy, who's an entrepreneur in his 30s, the youngest candidate on the list, made a good name for himself in this campaign. Everyone seems to like Owen McCarthy, and but he only got 4% of the vote. A disappointment for him. Garrett Mason with 11%, the former state senator, the only one, proudly, with Augusta experience. For everyone else on this list, an outsider, and like Bush and Midgley, McCarthy and Jones, CEOs. That was their big calling card. They know how to read numbers. They know what they've signed paychecks. Running on that management skill and experience, and Charles having different skills and experience, mostly in Washington, but a really significant lead. He actually said this afternoon, I haven't fact checked it, but we'll give it to him. He said no one has ever been ahead by 80% in a ranked choice race where it's held in the country and around the world, and lost. So he's very confident, even though he doesn't like what's about to happen. He would have liked to have been called the winner 9 days ago. Maybe he'll be called the winner within the hour. We'll see.
What do you think? And again, we're keeping an eye on that live video. Our crew's in our room, and us here as well for when that starts to happen. We'll bring it to you. But I'm curious what is going on in our political landscape. So we just went through 8 candidates just on the Republican side. Each of these races have several candidates. That we're not seeing before the election more candidates saying, I don't have the numbers, support this person. We see these candidates saying, I'm staying in the race, I'm going to get my 2.7% of the vote. What is that doing to the process that we're seeing people stay in the race so long so that we have 8 people on the ballot?
Well, hope springs eternal, right? I mean, it's a low barrier to entry in Maine. You only needed 2,000 signatures statewide to get on the ballot, and there's no minimum like you need X number in all 16 counties.
Just need that number.
It's other states like New York, where I'm from, have a much more complicated system to get on the ballot, and it's not so hard here in Maine. Some people run because they think they can win. Some people run to make a name for themselves. Some people run because they have a pet issue that they really want to get the public's attention. They want to participate in debates. They want to do stories on them. Some people are idealistic, So I can't explain what gets into someone's head. There are many more people who pass up the opportunity, don't have the proverbial fire in the belly,
to even
than actually do that.
Right.
Yeah.